Welcome to the New Rules for Work Labs, where we're rewriting the rules of work. In our lab, we glean insights from the world's foremost minds, exploring leadership, team dynamics, creativity, artificial intelligence, and more. Get ready for a journey into the future of work. This is the New Rules for Work Labs, where insights meet action.
This is episode 4 of a 4-part series looking at how to update the working team agreement for the future of work. Today, I ask our expert group, what next? As work changes, how do we need to change our practices around creating and maintaining strong team agreements? Okay, so let's look at the future. So how has your practice evolved, and going forward, what do you think's missing?
Well, I mean, one is people have to actually make team agreements. So I still, I mean, how long have we been talking about team agreements? It's been a decade now since we started, more than a decade. And still, every presentation, every workshop that I give, less than 10% of any audience has any kind of team agreement in place, and even less than that have any kind of personal user manual. Although those are getting more popular because everybody likes making those. Mm-hmm. But still to this day, I mean, you can talk about it all you want, but the initiative of actually doing it is, I think, the biggest blocker.
Right. Isn't that funny? Yeah, a decade on working team agreements. Is there anything missing in the practice of creating these agreements that you would love to see change in the future?
Why not now rather than wait to the future?
Yes, let's do it. Let's do it right now.
No, what I think is that, like everything, that many teams go through exercises because either someone tells them that they should do it, or they feel cool, or they're copying to your point earlier, what other companies are doing. So if you're going to get into an exercise, being a team agreement or whatever, be committed to go deep and be committed to implement it and learn from it and adapt it. But if you're not willing to change how you operate, don't waste people's time into going through an exercise that's going to create more frustration actually than help.
Right.
I think one of the things that I try and focus on is better equipping leaders and managers to do this kind of work themselves. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one big area, rather than requiring people from outside the organization coming in to help do this with teams, is how do we equip leaders and managers to be able to be more resourceful themselves? I think that's definitely one thing. And, we've talked about the workforce ecosystem, which I think is another area which adds another layer of complexity. And then I think the final one has to be how we can embrace some of the artificial intelligence that is being generated at the moment, whether that's through more automation, whether that's through more generative approaches, and how that is going to start to unfold in ways we have only perhaps just started to imagine.
Right. So I heard in there that this becomes a foundational skill for leaders and managers, and that, I think probably project managers and program managers would say that they have this skill because organizing and planning work is part of their work. But a team agreement really is different than just a project plan.
Yes. Yes. I think they're very equipped at the project plan, maybe not the relational plan.
How do you see this practice evolving? Or do you?
Very much so. And so if there's one thing that has been made clear by distributed work, growing distributed work, enforced distributed work, is that we never knew what we were doing to begin with. and that onboarding was one of the biggest charades in all of human history. And now we're finding that we do want to know what we're doing.
Mhm.
One of the most beautiful gifts of people being sequestered was that all of a sudden they're like, I don't feel like I know what's going on anymore, which meant they felt that they actually needed to be involved in both planning and in tracking the work, whereas before they were pretty happy to just kind of sit around and say, yeah, whatever. I go to this box and I perform these duties, but when they were at home, they tended to get a little bit more philosophical.
I'm wondering if we're skipping a
Mhm.
reflective step. We've all moved into remote environments. We've all decided that we can be in less stable teams. And I'm wondering if we need a moment to make sure that if both of those are really true.
Right. Was that a good idea?
Right. If we can get as much, I mean, I think we all in our hearts of hearts know that we can't get as much done in remote only environments, right? And we're just
Mhm.
now though seeing that that's true in say education, like just the first results of like long-term studies of how students learned in those environments that are coming
And
out.
and they're really damning.
It's not good. It's not good.
It's not good.
And like people
Yeah.
at work, adults at work are very different than children learning. Like I have to make that caveat, but there's a moment for us to decide, what needs to be in person or not, and what allows us, like new team formation, for example. I'm pretty dogmatic of like that has to happen in person. That's not something
Mhm.
that you want intermediated through a screen. We have enough research on that because academics worked in this kind of environment for a few decades before the pandemic, so we can draw some conclusions about like new working groups that needs to have like you can't form durable bonds if you start first in remote, not as durable. And we have some research to really plant our feet in that conclusion. So I'm mostly thinking of that. Like space is in physical environment is a tool that we forget is a tool quite often.
Right.
So I think that's really important.
With any project I've ever been on, the understanding that there is standard work and that there is variation on that standard work, and that standard work is not eternally standard work, but it evolves itself. And that if we don't have a system in place to allow that standard work to evolve, pretty soon we're just going to be doing random stuff.
Right.
That key dynamic is part of what drives a modern team. So can we see what we're doing now? Is there access to why we're doing it and how we're doing it? And how quickly can we bring people up to speed on the backstory? Can we tell our own backstory? Because Americans have no history, so we're really bad at telling our own stories. And if we are, it's like a history of like denial.
Right.
That's not a good way to run a team.
I I think that we have an insane level of bullshit work, which is not a new idea, but like the amount of work that people do to produce no outcome or to produce no end and without reflection is insane, especially in a
Right.
world that's like demanding that we change and we change faster than ever before. We don't have a lot of mechanisms internally to get rid of that clutter, to like refactor the organization. We're just constantly building on things that have already been built on. Our organizations are basically like the Winchester house in terms of like it's just a room put on a room put on a room put on a room, and we're just moving as quickly
No,
as
no,
we
no. If we do stairs up there, the ghosts will exit, I
I know.
promise.
They'll stay up there. And it is really like there is a true leap from that, I think, in how our organizations are built and how we run them.
I'm thinking that the world has always been complex, so the expressions of that complexity change, and people complain about change being exponentially rapid and chaotic since the first day of humanity, since they started recording change.
Uh-huh.
So I think that in the end, you cannot control the context, you cannot control the pressure, you cannot control many aspects, but you can control how we want to work together. So any a movement towards clarity in terms of how we want to collaborate, how we want to work as a team is always going to help us become derailed from external factors. And that's things that, for example, when you get a lot of pressure from shareholders or your senior leaders because the numbers are not there, because we're not getting into our goals as fast as we should, when you have clear rules of engagement within a team, that helps the team come up together with solutions rather than divide and conquer and start finger pointing or blaming each other. No, so for me, clarity is magic in a team setting.
Yeah. Why are we here? What are we creating? And how do we do it? Right?
Yeah.
Like those seem like such basic, obvious questions. I think both the why and the how
Mhm.
are so hard to answer sometimes
Yeah.
that
It's easier not to. It's
it's
easier
a
just to
lot
get
easier.
into the tasks. And I
That's
think
right.
that's what we're tempted to do, is to just, well, let's just get doing something and the rest of it will sort itself out, because the kind of questions that we've just talked about are timeless. They were already the questions we were asking in the 80s and 90s.
Mhm.
And yet they are still so incredibly relevant because the context around us has changed so much.
And that's it. You just tapped into what's so hard about this right now, right? Because there is something about just getting into the work
Mm-hmm.
to see how it will evolve that tells you what the work needs to be.
Yeah.
In an incredibly complex adaptive scenario, you really can't plan your way
No.
to success. So, why, what, and how really are questions that, yes, you shouldn't assume them.
Yeah.
And just leave them unasked. On the other hand, you need to get comfortable with knowing that you can't necessarily answer them completely either.
Yes, yes. And not to get paralyzed at the beginning by trying to work everything out before
Right.
you start.
Right.
You can't project plan through something like this. You can take some steps and then you need to notice what's actually happening
Mhm.
to then make some adjustments.
Right.
But you're not going to be able to predict everything that's coming ahead because we can't nowadays.
It's
We
just
have
not
to
how
be
it's
much
working.
more adaptive. We're back to adaptive teaming. We have to be much more adaptive and pay attention and pause to review, to refresh, to reimagine. Whatever is happening in front of us, we'll know more than we did know.
Right.
We can
Right. Which means that even those stable teams are becoming adaptive teams to a degree.
Yes.
Stable.
So there's I've always pined for the day that we're going to have a chief complexity reduction officer role in organization whose job it is to just knock down walls and bad processes and things that don't produce ends, because it's just too easy to build new things and not easy enough to really reflect on and get rid of parts of our organization.
I wonder if that's something where we can develop specialists, right? Like friction fighter specialists. Because, half of my work as a meeting expert, meetings propagate where how we work and what we're meant to do is unclear. Right. So then the number of bullshit meetings is directly correlate to the lack of effective processes for creating value. And yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there should anybody have the will to budget and prioritize it. How do you prioritize
1000%.
deprioritizing stuff?
Well said. I just think that also groups have a hard time understanding what activities are actually most effective at moving the team forward. And that's the nature of the world that we live in, that there's a billion levers we can all pull, and we have a very confused idea of what it produces, and there's natural noise in our system. But there's also just a lack of team alignment to for your earliest point, that we don't understand what is contributing to us moving forward. What's our shared definition of it? And we just live in I have a lot of empathy for leaders today because we live in such an individualistic society, which I appreciate too. I'm a Texan by birth. I'll never be able to let that go. But anyone at any time can like pull the andon cord and stop progress in most organizations. And it's very difficult to have a shared sense of reality of like where we are, why this thing that we're doing is really important and critical, and what are the most important and critical things that we do together.
Right, right. Flexibility is a blurse,
Yeah.
blessing, curse, double-edged,
Yeah.
all of
Good
those
for me too.
things. Um,
So the reason that we start with the value stream mapping, or ostensibly start with it, it's the second thing we do, but is that when you bring people together of a variety of different communications and learning styles,
Mhm.
and you just throw them into a large, expansive, collaborative act, they actually have no common grounding or language or structure to ideate around. And so what makes the value stream mapping exercise so powerful is that it's starting off with something extremely grounded. This is just the stuff we have to do to get our work done.
right.
But then we do take that one step beyond and we say, okay, who do you collaborate with and where in this? What information do they need? What information are they missing? What breaks down? And then what ends up happening is that ends up functionally answering that question. What value is it that you're creating? And the way you see that as a facilitator is you see where people are frustrated within the existing value stream. And that existing value stream doesn't necessarily have to have been engaged yet. So if they haven't started working yet, you'll just see where their fears are.
Mm-hmm.
And then the working agreement is facilitating the work, allaying those fears, and creating some sort of mechanism to make sure that you're constantly looking to see what those relationships are that need to be fostered, protected, underwritten, to maintain not only the working agreement, but also the health and safety and psyche of the people doing the work.
Interesting. So I heard in there pre-mortem, I heard in there, some other important decision-making and collaborative questions that you're suggesting get surfaced automatically just by walking the work and saying, how should it work? What are you doing at each phase and who are you working with and how should that work to work well?
Yeah. When we go to the office, even if it's virtual, we are a bunch of individuals in a team creating value. And that in so doing, we are a bunch of people who are interacting over the dinner table of this work. And the only way that we can have agency or psychological safety or those other things is if our ability to work as professionals is actually supported, as Mark said, respected. So this is where respect actually comes from. I'm able to do my work. I'm able to engage with you, and I'm able to show you that I care about you and that you can care about me too, and that we're not going to stab each other in the backs. We're gonna build something cool together.
Assuming these teams are part of a larger organization, it helps to have a couple things. One, is there some sort of, I'll use the term social fabric in place, but is there already an understanding amongst the soup that these teams are going to form from? Do they have some understanding of each other? Do they know likes, dislikes, preferences already? Sometimes that can be some artifact. Sometimes it's just, is there some spaces where they already bump into each other? So, is it the water cooler? Is it a special interest group? I found if you have some of those social elements in place before the team forms and they get to know each other, the teams form much faster.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if there's an evolution of leadership itself, where leaders know as one of their foundational skill sets, that this is something that they need to do.
I wish. What came up for me when you were saying that is I thought that when leaders have to role model the behavior that they want to see, of course, but then also leadership is too important to leave to the leaders. That's one of those the Jürgen Apollo quotes, and so I feel like it's almost everybody's job on the team to take some responsibility for how the team is functioning. And so I always say, I mean, Cal Newport in his books, he always says, listen, there's all kinds of teams out there where people aren't interested, and you've now learned about the hyperactive hive mind and nobody knows what else you're talking about. And so what he says is start with yourself.
Yeah.
Make it so that your meetings are so good that people talk about them. Make it so that you have a personal user manual and that the way you work is clear, and that, you know, like start first with yourself and figure all that out. And then hopefully that inspires others on the team.
That's cool. Yeah.
I mean, it's going to take somebody who really cares a lot to go through that.
You know, it goes back to the Vonnegut quote, you know, God damn it, you've got to be kind. And if we don't do that, we don't get work done.
Right.
Almost all of our delays can be traced back to some sort of toxic behavior. Our toxic behaviors usually can be traced back to some sort of poorly planned work or poorly planned organizational structure. It's very rarely because you're working for a narcissist. It's mostly because you set up a stupid bureaucracy that's screwing things up in some way or another and upsetting people. So if we want these working agreements to last, we have to not just set up a working agreement that makes us feel good at the beginning of the project. We need to set up a working agreement that actually builds a culture of continuous improvement and active caring. And that is possible. Mark's done it. I've done it. You've done it. It's not common, but it's possible. And it's the number one best investment that any company or funding agency can make when they're starting anything at all. And it's the only way a project is going to be sustainable. If the team lasts 2 months or 2 years, doesn't matter. It's just, do you know what you're supposed to do, and do you have the freedom to do it?
And as Jim just demonstrated, you don't always need a visual to do that, but it helps.
You don't always need a visual to do that, like you don't always need vegetables. Okay. It is true that you can have a meal without vegetables, but if you have too many of them, you're going to be in trouble. So
yes.
Work should be visual. Work should be visual. Work should be visual. And if you're not visualizing your work, then you're very quickly creating an excellent system for people to become unaligned.
That's right. Wrapping up then, we've been on the journey from the 80s to the future. I feel like we've had like the Disneyland sort of tour, which is so fun. What else should I have asked, and what else should people know about working agreements and working with you?
Wow. I think we should all continue to be curious. I think for me, that curiosity, experimentation, and just keep asking questions. Because when we ask questions and when we come together and we explore the what ifs and how could we's, and then things open up. So it's just then becomes, okay, we've discovered something, let's play with that, let's work with that, and we will know more than we know now.
Thank you for the stories and the passion and the reminder to love on each other, right? Make it clear, make it obvious,
make your work practical, make it work.
Yep, make it work. Wonderful.
Thank you for joining us in the lab. We appreciate our guests for contributing to the thoughtful discussions on the future of work. If you've enjoyed the ideas we've explored today and want to put them into action, check out our companion newsletter. at labs.newrulesforwork.com for the practical activities and additional resources. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback is the catalyst for our ongoing journey into the future of work. Thank you once again for joining us. We'll see you next time in the lab.
Thank you.
Well, this was
Thanks
an
for
okay
having us,
way to
Steve.
start a Monday.